Thank you for that. Now let's move on to more military stuff here, and the question of accountability, Charles.
Yeah, we go to the United States for this one, and Lieutenant Colonel Brad Miller, who's a retired US Army serviceman, sent a tweet on New Year's Day in which he introduced the Declaration of Military Accountability. He wrote in his tweet that senior military leaders received an email with a letter attached called the Declaration of Military Accountability. The letter is not addressed to the military leaders, but rather to the American people. The email was merely to inform these military leaders that there is a group of troops and vets pledging to the American public that we will do everything lawfully within our power to stop the willful destruction of our military by its own leadership. Now, there are 231 signatories to this declaration, and a petition has been started which has got well over 20,000 signatures on it. So the tweet also had the declaration itself attached, which begins with a quote from John Adams. "Our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." And then he goes on, or at least the declaration goes on, "In the course of human events, it sometimes becomes necessary to admonish the lawless, encourage the faint-hearted, and strengthen the weak. We have reached just such a time in our history. The affairs of our nation are now steeped in avaricious corruption, and our once stalwart institutions, including the Department of Defense, are failing to fulfill the moral obligations upon which they were founded. Standing upon our natural and constitutional rights, we hereby apprise the American people that we have exhausted all internal efforts to rectify recent criminal activity within the armed forces." Now, although Miller didn't write the entire declaration himself, what he and the others are talking about is the way in which the rollout of COVID vaccines and indeed mandates were handled. And he further goes on to write, or at least the declaration goes on to state, that while implementing the COVID-19 vaccine mandate, military leaders broke the law, trampled constitutional rights, denied informed consent, permitted unwilling medical experimentation, and suppressed the free exercise of religion. Service members and families were significantly harmed by these actions. Their physical suffering continues to be felt financially, emotionally, and physically. Some service members became part of our ever-growing veteran homeless population, and some even lost their lives. In an apparent attempt to avoid accountability, military leaders are continuing to ignore our communications regarding these injuries and the laws that were broken. So, what they intend to do is to put people in office who are able to take this on head on. And the document closes out with the text, "We promise to exhaust all moral, ethical, and legal means to restore the rule of law, and will begin by attempting to hold senior military leaders accountable. The Constitution is the supreme law of our land. We will fight to enforce that law and put an end to the two-tiered justice system. May future generations see our efforts, and, God willing, may they also be the recipients of the great gift of liberty that we have had the honour of safeguarding." So it's well-informed, well-written, punchy stuff, and it has gained traction in the sort of commentariat, as it were, and the Brownstone Institute has published a piece by Gwendolyn Cull, entitled "Who Will Deliver Justice to Our Service Members?" I should pause here to just mention that the founder of the Brownstone Institute, Geoffrey Tucker, was interviewed by UK Column last year, an interview titled "Geoffrey Tucker and the Brownstone Institute." So please do go and look that up. But Gwendolyn Cull's piece begins with, "While Pfizer and Moderna were testing rats in their labs, our government had their own guinea pigs lining up for the largest biomedical experiment the world has ever seen. Except these were not test animals. These were our United States service members, our men and women in uniform. And the test was not for general health, military readiness, or preparedness. Rather, it was a social and pharmaceutical experiment that has severely hampered the readiness of our military and weakened trust in the once formidable institution." So we have to consider that although the picture is different in the United States in the way that mandates were introduced, the United Kingdom has a similarity in that the United Kingdom armed forces were, in effect, put under tremendous pressure to have such an injection. And a Freedom of Information request from 2021 illustrates the numbers concerned. A question was asked, the number of people who've chosen not to receive one or more vaccines, and indeed how this affects their medical deployability standard, MDS. Unusually, the response was frank and full. 881 regular armed forces personnel have a read code for declining a COVID-19 vaccination. And then the next point is quite important. The COVID vaccination is not treated as an occupational vaccine. Thus, there is no change to an individual's medical deployment standard. However, some countries require full or partial COVID-19 vaccination as a condition of entry. This may affect individuals' eligibility to deploy to certain areas. This is managed by individuals' chain of command. So, in effect, what we see is them skirting around the issue, and rather than saying that they have a mandate in place, to put the onus on the requirements for a country that a member of the armed forces might be going into. The other thing worth noting is the lack of medical confidentiality, and the chain of command, of course, is fully aware as to whether or not somebody has had a vaccination. Just to recap, we'll have a look at the numbers, since numbers are so critical at the moment. We'll just have a quick look at how the COVID support force worked with what was called the COVID support force, the MOD's contribution. And this involved 34,000 servicemen and women to be deployed during that period since the 18th of March 2020, broken down in numbers. There were 5,300 deployed supporting testing. There were another 950 involved constructing the Nightingale hospitals, which of course were never even used, more than 300 in the ambulance services, and 500 distributing PPE across the country. So there was an enormous commitment to it. And really, we have to look at, first of all, the politicisation, but also what exactly is the Army's position on vaccination in any case? We look at Queen's regulations from 1975, and under health protection, with the commanding officer's responsibility, we see that vaccination against communicable disease is subject to individual voluntary informed consent. All members of the unit are to be strongly encouraged to receive recommended vaccinations and are to be made available to do so. But looking further down the track, and indeed further down the regulations, we see in Annex H to Chapter 5, Section 13 states that every case of skin grafting or vaccination with experimental vaccine in which the soldier, under the supervision of the regulated medical authority, acts as a donor of blood, and so on, these entries are to be made in red ink right across the sheet, which seems like a quite extraordinary measure to take in such an instance. But it does give an idea, should further experimental vaccines come down the track, what might be happening to members of the armed forces. And bearing in mind, this course was written in 1975. Again, you thinking of the armed forces being used as a tool of the narrative, it's worth talking about the forthcoming veterans' ID cards, which, after being announced in 2019, are finally being released, but only after they've had a successful assessment from the Central Digital and Data Office, making it look very much like they were held up until the situation could be digitized. And I will just close out by referring back to last week. We spoke about laser capabilities and what the United Kingdom might have and what Russia might have. We spoke about the Dragonfire laser power, which is on screen now. And it's just worth noting that there was a government update just after the UK column news last week, which reports that the military laser could boost the armed forces with greater accuracy. And they've brought a few sort of bullets out of that presentation, saying that the precision means that they'd be able to hit a £1 coin from a kilometre away. They can engage targets at the speed of light, which of course suggests that had the Russians anything comparable, then the drones that are being manufactured for Ukraine stand very little chance. And also keen to put across the environmental credentials. Firing it for 10 seconds is the cost equivalent of using a regular heater for just an hour. So the cost of operating the laser is typically less than £10 per shot. That's the sort of wrap up on the military accountability bit. But I think the key takeaway is exactly what might be in the pipeline for the United Kingdom Armed Forces, exactly like Mike stresses, with the coronavirus regulations or restrictions as they were, and the employment of the armed forces. what exactly might lie ahead.
Okay, thank you for that, Charles. Now, just to close this section off then, I want to bring James Karaoke on screen. He's the UK's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations. And he was giving a presentation yesterday about Ukraine. And he said that, colleagues, 2 years ago, Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This war benefits no one, not Russians and certainly not Ukrainians. And really, I was just wondering, well, who does it benefit, actually? And the question is, all this narrative that we were talking about at the beginning of the program, who does that benefit? Well, let's just have a look, because here is a graph. We'll see the graph now as it builds. This is the defence and aerospace all-share measure for the FTSE and for this, of course, the London Stock Exchange. And as we can see very well that the defence and aerospace industries are benefiting very well from it. So in the last 12 months alone, 69.72% increase in the value of defence and aerospace shares. And actually, if we go back to late 2020, since then, it looks like around about a 300% increase since then. So I think the defence industry doing very, very well. Thank you very much. And certainly someone is benefiting.